after having spent decades working with horses therapeutically, to use your words, you say they naturally breathe, move, and live in relationship. And then if we take that reality and then we look at most men, 18 to 35, they're living the opposite, disconnected from their bodies, their instincts, their ability to be present, self aware of who they are. I'd like to hear your truth and insight on why men have lost access to that instinctual knowing.
In the wild, horses are prey animals. What that means for those who may question is they're the ones that get eaten, chased, tracked by lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. They do not go out and hunt. The way that horses have survived and developed their ability to survive is in relationship, in herds, in a community, and they're reliant on each other. One of the coolest things about prey animals, we often think of prey animals as weak. Well, horses are not weak. In all honesty, I'd rather be hanging around a bear than a horse. If I have to get in a fight with either one of them, I would have a better chance with a bear. Horses not only are prey animals, they not only live in community, they not only thrive because of relationship. Their senses are extremely acute. They can smell from other animals or predators from up to 5 miles away. They can hear better than almost any other animal. They're also incredibly fast, and they work together. When we go in and we're not predatorial, they don't have to be prey. So the playing field gets leveled. What I've seen with men, I think you said like between 20 and 35, something like that, is that we often feel as if we're prey and the people or things or society or something is coming after us.
Yeah, I think in general, many men feel subtly and overtly threatened. And then I think the general societal sentiment, I think, backs that up in a lot of ways by essentially, yeah, calling men often the problem or that they have problems, but not offering the support or resonance, the knowing of how they arrived at having those problems. And that, yes, to your point, many men, yeah, have this deep
Yeah.
sense of abandonment almost, like you said, they don't get me and I'm kind of stuck by myself in it.
Well, even being told that there's this thing called toxic masculinity, I don't buy that term. I think that periodically there are some men who behave in a toxic way. That part's true. The masculinity, that the whole core being of who we are, being called toxic is literally an attack. It actually puts us in a place of being prey. The difference that I see is in horses, they will go to the herd. They will go to, and I've done a lot with horses who are in the wild, both up in British Columbia and up in northern Wyoming. But when there's trouble, horses come together. When there's trouble in young men, they split apart, they isolate. And that's part of what we've been taught. It's like the whole idea of us moving into, it's like we need to take care of ourselves and the rugged individual and the Marlboro man and you can do it. And it actually, what it builds is sort of this false confidence because we look like we're together. We look like or try to act like we're confident, but we don't go together and go, hey, Wes, I need some help here. I just need to friggin' stand next to you for a while until I feel okay. Well, that's what horses do. They go stand next to each other till they feel okay. And they're up in the Black Hills, and there's a close 17,000 acre wild horse refuge, which I did a bunch of stuff up there. If you watch horses, actually, there was a whole herd of there were a bunch of herds. There were numbers of herds on that large plot of land. But there was a herd, and they were actually down by a river. I was standing like up where you could look down, and a bear started coming across. Well, the first thing that happened was a group, and they were actually the stallions came and stood between the bear and the rest of the herd. The rest of the herd started pulling together. So they actually sort of went whoop, and then as this bear got closer, the lead mare actually took off. So the whole herd took off, but they all went together. And And it was that safety in numbers piece, and that piece of being able to go, yeah, you actually have my back. And what was the most interesting that I saw was the youngest horses, and most of them were by then yearlings or close to being yearlings, they were pushed out in front. So if the bear was over here and the herd was going that way, the yearlings, the most vulnerable, were out in front. The older horses were in back, sort of building. It was almost like there was a wall. It wasn't quite that organized, but you could tell there was. And so the herd dynamics is where the horses pull together. Like I have two big quarter horses and I have a little Welsh Mountain pony. When she gets scared, what do you think she does? Yeah, she goes and hides behind the big horses. And it's like, well, we as men, and especially young men, we don't have that. We don't have that herd. We don't have that. Who can I go hide behind? Or who can I go hang out with and go, I need your help. I need your protection. I need your groundedness. We don't have that. So the whole isolation thing versus the herd piece there's a dramatic difference. The other piece I think that enters into that is that by and large, we are predators and we actually have to, and in the whole way that we become predators, oftentimes that actually creates isolation. I think the other two things that create isolation are patriarchy and privilege. Patriarchy, there's a lot going on right now with patriarchy and people talking about that. Patriarchy is not a good thing for me because it's isolative. Privilege is not a good thing for men because it's isolative. It separates us instead of having a process where it's like, hey, I need some help here. I need a community.
Yeah, and I think part of that community, it's necessary to have those bigger horses in your life, aka older, more mature, almost protective like male figures. And I think that's the other thing. Not only do we have it reciprocally in social relationships like peer to peer, but we're the role models, right? Like, where have all the old men gone, to use that question? And I think there's a real need for established male presence, the stallions per se, to really allow the young to get in front. But now we live in a society where it's just the young in the open field and the bears are still coming, but there's no stallions there to be that protector.
Right. Even for me, I turned 75 this last summer. And I have one dear, dear close friend, and I might even say my closest best friend, who's 72. He's the only man that I have, and we would do anything for each other, and we have. I mean, we have gone through deaths together. We've gone through illnesses together. We've gone through joint replacements together. And my partner, Kimberly, is fantastic. And I mean, she's unbelievably supportive, but there's this other Mark is my friend's name. And it's like, there's something different. But what's weird for me is I actually thought when I was 50 that by the time be 70, I'd have 4 or 5 really close male friends that I'd be hanging out with. And I don't. There's another guy that I hang out with. I have breakfast with a couple times a year. But it's like, we don't even have that. And so younger men who need that, it's hard. It's not available, which I've actually thought about. Mark and I have put together a thing called the Elder Council. I've actually thought about putting something out and trying to get a group of men with a minimum age requirement of 65 or something like that to actually pull together and do something that, because there's not a lot of support. Most of my friends are fit between 45 and 55. And they're wonderful people, but there's a big difference between that 25 to 30 years of experience gives us a different view.
Most men come to therapy trying to fix themselves, like they're broken machines. You teach therapists to work from instinct and intuition instead of protocols and pathology. Can you walk me through the moment you realized the mental health system had it backwards, that relationship heals, not diagnosis? And I imagine your personal story relates to that as well.
Yeah, it does. Let me sort of give a bit of a background. Are you familiar at all with the shootings on the Kent State campus in 1970?
No, I'm not.
Have you ever heard of the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song "Four Dead in Ohio"?
I'm sure I have at some point.
At some point. So where that fits in is I had graduated from Akron University in 1970 with a degree in mechanical engineering and physics, which I actually loved that degree and loved learning. That was something that I was sort of in my bones, even though I grew up in a very rural Amish community, actually. But I was also very active in the civil rights movement and anti-Vietnam War. And Kent State in Ohio is about 12 to 15 miles from Akron University. And there was me and actually my sister and some other people were demonstrating against the war and demonstrating for civil rights. And I'm trying to remember what it was, day 3 or 4. I believe it was day 4. Day 3, somebody had set fire to the ROTC building on the Kent State campus. ROTC is Reserve Officer Training Corps, which interestingly enough, every male student had to be in ROTC in a state-sanctioned university across the U.S. That was part of what needed to happen. You had to be in ROTC at least 2 years. And the next day after the demonstrations, and the riots would probably be an accurate word, there was a lot of commotion on the Kent State campus, and I was staying there actually with my girlfriend at the time, and we heard the commotion. We started walking up toward the ROTC building, and in a relatively short period of time, the National Guard opened up fire and started shooting students. 4 were killed, and depending on what reports you look at, either 9 or 11 were injured. And I was right in the middle of all of that. I was affected enough and traumatized enough that I said right now I can't be an engineer. And I'd been hired at Rubbermaid because that's where I did my internship. And I turned that down. I actually was hired then for $25,000 a year, which took me another 10 years of doing other things to be able to make $25,000 a year. Ended up coming out to Colorado to backpack and get away from everything, and basically began looking at what did I want to do. And that was really to work with people. Went back and got a couple other degrees, and like a double master's degree, one in special ed and it was the same master's degree, but there were 2 majors, special ed and counseling. And most of the counseling at the time everything was based, it was either psychoanalysis or it was behavioral, and neither one of those made sense to me. The idea of laying on a couch and talking every day for an hour to somebody without anyone responding made no sense. And the whole behavioral thing made no sense either. Eventually, this was through sort of a series of events, I ended up in therapy myself. And that therapist was a Gestalt therapist. After about 6 months, I was going, this is the first kind of therapy that makes sense to me, because it was so relational. And so I actually asked him, where did you train? And so I went and started training where he trained, went through a whole process there, and again, through another whole series of events. And this was after about 6 years of training in Gestalt and also bioenergetics and Reiki and body and breath work. And that began my journey of working in a way that was sort of against the system, because nobody or very few people were in that sort of arena, so to speak. As therapy progressed, the big shift that happened, and it was somewhere in the 80s, and I don't know exactly what year it came in, but it was managed care. Came in through the insurance companies, where you would get 6 or 8 sessions, and you had to prove to insurance companies that you were doing something valuable, basically. And I refused to do that. I refused to take insurance. And it was out of that I began to put together a process of, well, let me say why I refused to take insurance, because the insurance companies were looking for evidence-based therapy. And if you think about it, the only thing that you can really measure in evidence-based is behavior. You can't measure relationship. You can't measure caring. You can't measure love. You can't measure, like you mentioned before we started recording, you have one child and another on the way. And if I were to ask you, can you measure how much you love your wife and your child or your child that's on their way? Could you do that? And so if I asked you that, what would you say?
I mean, it's not quantifiable, and I wouldn't take long to get into a very kind of throw up my hands like I just can't explain it. It's just real and true.
Exactly. I mean, maybe the level of measurement that you can have is that level of measurement I would have is I would die trying to support or protect or care for somebody that I love that much. Well, that's completely opposed to the evidence-based model. So since I have began working, my life has actually been geared, both my life in general, but also my life in this paradigm has been really looking at what do we need relationally to be able to grow and how do we need that? And that does not come out of evidence-based stuff. That doesn't come out of here are these three things that if we do these three things, everything's going to be good, or the sort of quote miracle question of short-term therapy. If you could have everything the way you want it, then what would that be? And you say it, and then the therapist goes, okay, now you can do that. And, that's not the way that we work. What has happened over the years is that we've actually become more and more, or many people have tried to make us more and more like computers. Like, what are the three codes that you need to do this? Where are your files for this and that kind of thing? And so I have had I've sort of been a rebel my entire life, and I'm going, that doesn't work. That doesn't help people grow. And when people have experienced major attachment issues or major trauma issues or major loss, the only thing that heals those things is a deep, intimate relationship that we as therapists can have with our clients, because that's what we're all longing for. We're longing for, are we safe? And we're longing for we're always asking two questions. One is, are we safe and where do we belong? And interestingly enough, that's what horses do. They want to know those two things. When we have those two things in place, then that begins to build the foundation of being able to do whatever else we need to do. And that also begins to build the foundation of us being able to take a risk, so that because every time we do something brand new, it's at least on some level, and it might only be on a scale of 1 to 10, it might only be a 1, but on some level, we're taking a risk, if that makes any sense. But we need to
Yeah.
know that we're safe and that we belong somewhere before we're able to take that risk. And every new relationship or every new aspect of a relationship we move into, that there's some level of risk in that. And that's the piece that the being safe and knowing where we belong is actually, those are the two things, major things that really are foundational for our attachment process early on.
Well, thank you for sharing your personal story. And I resonate in that, it's often the case that our core wounding can bind us to our purpose or how we end up kind of expressing who we are in the world to others. And it seems like that certainly was a genesis for you. And, a question that comes up for me when you talk about relationship with others being the healing balm that we need, I'm curious if you can speak to a man's relationship with himself. Maybe if a young man comes to you convinced something is fundamentally wrong with him, there's this very common toxic shame, low sense of self-worth that many of us men tend to have. How do you help him see that he's not broken, and how do you help him understand the relationship he has with himself that is healing instead of hurtful?
One of the big pieces that happens with men in our early attachment process is because of the way that we develop and because of the way our brains develop, as beginning in utero as well as early in our infancy, is that we actually take longer to develop. Boys take longer to develop than girls do. By the time a girl is 18-ish months old, they're as developed, and they're many times physically, but also emotionally, but more importantly, their brain development is as is about the same as a boy between 24 and 30 months old. So girls are about 25% to 40% ahead of boys in that development. The biggest thing that happens is that and this is research by both Alan Shore and Ian McGilchrist, is that our right brain actually, we have two hemispheres of our brain. In the third trimester, they've developed about the same. In the third trimester of pregnancy, our left brain sort of just starts hanging out, and our right brain starts developing, what's the right word, like in depth, and actually pretty fast. Most of our development, most of our attachment, let me say that, is in utero is mom's right brain to baby's right brain. There's actually an energetic connection. The same thing happens during birth and after birth, where our right brain energetic connection between moms and babies can be measured. And one of the main energetic connections between moms and babies. Just a little bit of an aside, our right brain has language, but not speech, interestingly enough. So when moms, and I don't know if you've experienced this in your relationship, like a baby is born and mothers are taking care of their baby with nurturing and perhaps breastfeeding. And many times they go, I have baby brain. I can't think anymore. I've lost my ability to think in a logical manner. It isn't because they've lost their ability to think. What it is that their right brain is developing both in moms and babies so quickly that there is language, there's just not speech in there. And there's a tremendous depth in that. What happens is that the little boys stay in, and that period where our right brains are developing that's an incredibly sensitive period for all infants. But boys stay in that period longer than girls do, like by about a third of the time. So part of what happens is that boys end up being much more vulnerable than girls because of the time we stay in there. The other piece that happens in that is that boys are treated dramatically different than girls. And one of the biggest things that we need to develop the self-confidence and the love for ourselves and the belief and the trust in ourselves is touch, is the actual physical touch, as well as like the three things I talk about a lot in attachment are food, touch, and movement. Boys get the food, they get a lot of the movement, but they don't get the touch. Actually, by the time a boy is 2 years old, they get touched half as much as a 2-year-old girl gets touched on average. So that touch is what gives us the confidence. That touch is what gives us the feeling and the knowing that we're okay. That touch is what grounds us when we're being grounded. And that touch either by mom or dad or other caregivers. We end up losing some of the foundational building blocks that we need to be able to literally stand on our own 2 feet and feel like we're okay and like we're okay in the world. So there's 2 pieces in the developmental stuff that I talk about. I don't think my developmental stuff is so earth-shaking as it is usable. And maybe being usable makes it a little bit earth-shaking because most people go through school, if they're in any kind of human services, they learn all kinds of developmental theories. And not many people, even when they've just graduated 2 or 3 years ago, can tell me the stages of Erickson's developmental theories. I only know it because I taught it for 35 years, basically, at a couple of different places. But it's like what I tried to put together is something that I look at language, behavior, relationships, what's happening somatically, what's happening spiritually and culturally in all of those stages and what people say. So it's easy to tell where somebody is because of what they say or how they behave or what they do relationally. But it's like what we're looking at is that core foundation that attachment actually provides, which is what gives us the ability to make it through the world and not feel like we're not okay. The other thing then in therapy is when we have therapists being trained in protocols and we have therapists being trained in behavioral processes, or we have therapists that say, well, be careful of transference because we don't want your clients to like you too much. I mean, all of that kind of stuff. What happens is that we don't enter in as therapists in a way that we need to, because part of what we need to create in our therapeutic process is a deep, energetic, emotional intimacy. which we don't get in protocol and we don't get in what I call domesticated therapy.
Yeah. I'm just being drawn back to my own experience as a little boy and feeling that's very much how I felt. And I've always really connected physically with people who are close to me and found it really healing. And I actually had an experience a couple years ago with through psychedelic assisted therapy. Essentially, like I got towards the end of the session and the experience, I tapped into that boy spirit and I just started running around outside barefoot, and
Hmm.
it was so healing, and it felt like I was just grabbing everything in nature and, like, I guess to use your language, like re-securely attaching to the earth and to these things. And it really made me think of how that little boy is unhealed in so many of us men. And I'm curious if that's a common framework you find and use when you meet a guy who, says he's broken. It's, so interesting. So much of your answer was going backwards, and so much of the work seems to actually need to go backwards before you can go forward and to reintegrate and get back in touch with that part of you. And I'm curious if that initial wounding in a boy comes from the father typically, or socially with other boys, a mix of it. What's your sense of kind of where you find common woundings that many men find within their inner boy?
I don't know that I have found a common wounding place. What at least from a person that from a specific person. It could be the biggest thing I've actually found is a feeling inside somebody of not where the person is saying, I don't feel like people get me. It's like, I don't feel like you get me. I don't feel like you, because I talk about 5 different things in relationships. I talk about being seen, heard, gotten, cherished, and protected. The 2 biggest pieces that I see with boys is that they're not gotten, and oftentimes they're not protected. The um, and interestingly enough, I mean, in the work that I do and the work that I've done, I mean, because I've been doing this in one way or another since 1970, is the biggest thing I get is that people don't get me. People don't get how much I hurt. People don't get how deeply I feel. People don't get how lonely I am. People don't get how hungry I am. I think it was Gabor Mate, was it Mate that wrote The Hungry Ghost? I think it was him.
Yes. Yeah.
And that feeling of, I just wish that someone would friggin' get me. And what I've found in the therapeutic work I've done and also the teaching I've done is that the people not getting somebody, some of it's societal where I don't think boys and men, I don't think there's a huge push to really get somebody. But the other part has a lot to do with many of our parents. Many of those early wounding places are not purposeful on our parents' parts. Our parents, sometimes it is purposeful. I don't want to negate that. But I mean, even for me, and I didn't go into this part of my history, when I was born, my mother had tuberculosis. She was diagnosed in 1949. I was born in 1950s. She was carrying me still. But when I was born, she was whisked away to the sanitarium because there were no antibiotics then that would deal with tuberculosis. I was whisked away, and everyone was worried that I'd get it, tuberculosis. Thankfully, I didn't. But it's like, that's not her fault. It's not something she tried to do. And even the same way with my father. My father had PTSD from World War II, and even then, people didn't even talk about PTSD. They called it shell shock. It's like that. It's like both of them were going through their own thing. And I don't really look back and go, oh, they did the best they could. I mean, that's somewhat, people do say that in therapy. like, well, your parents did the best they could. That's different than going back and saying, this is what happened and this is how it affected me, and doing that with what I call zero valence of, and what I mean by that is seeing it for what it is without a judgment, because there's so much judgment in what we do. If we go back and just say, oh, my parents did the best they could, that undermines our ability to go, yeah, I really experienced an injury, an emotional injury. That's different than going, I experienced an emotional injury and the infliction of that injury was not a purposeful process. You see the difference between those two pieces? One is almost dismissive. Well, I don't want to dismiss it. The other piece in going back where you said we need to go back, I don't know that that's any different than almost anything else. Like I mentioned to you, I was in a jujitsu class this morning. We worked 98% of what we worked on is foundation. Like there's all kinds of techniques. But if you don't have foundation, then those techniques are not as effective. Also, the exact same thing with horsemanship. Like yesterday, I was able to get on my horse and actually rode for a couple of hours. And I hadn't been able to ride for a couple of weeks. So mostly because of weather and because I was out of town. But it was like the first 45 minutes was just going back to the foundation of horsemanship. So a lot of what I look at is what needs to happen for our foundation to be really strong and to be really solid. And that the foundation I'm talking about is what I call integrated attachment. I do not use the word secure attachment. And I can talk about why if you would like me to. But it's like the more integrated we can become as a person, the more foundation we have.
Yeah, I think I would like to hear you speak to that and unpack your own take on attachment theory, which you call the Freeman attachment cycle, that you say focuses on question that every human asks. Speaking earlier to your point about safety, asking, is the world okay? Am I okay? Whether someone is in utero, in middle school or young adult, 50, always working through those first stages, it seems. So I'm curious if you can tell me a common process or maybe a case study of a guy that really stuck out to you, that he discovers that he never got the yes answer to those questions. Am I okay? Is the world okay? And then maybe you can weave in why you don't use the word secure.
You bet. When I started in my 20s, I started looking at attachment, and I didn't know then that what I was doing was literally looking for answers to some questions I didn't even know I was asking because I wasn't sort of there yet. In my early 20s, I was pretty angry. I would get my feelings hurt easily. I would struggle with relationships, and literally relationship after relationship. If any young woman liked me, I could not even fathom why. It's like, why does this person like me? What I actually realized, and this was through some of my own therapy, this was through studying, and interestingly enough, I was dating a woman at the time who had been adopted. And I realized, well, she was talking about her process of being adopted and the loss of her biological mother. It was like, oh, fuck. My process is the same because I'd lost my biological mother. I didn't live with her until I was 18 months old. So when I moved back in with her, there's our newspaper article saying that I was like a neighborhood kid moving in. When I speak of, is the world an okay place to be, which is what really the question that we're asking, and that's usually from birth to actually pre-birth to about 18 months. And then am I okay as we begin learning that between about 18 months and 3.5 or 4 years, is what we're actually asking is this a place that I can thrive? Is this a place where the world's okay and can I be okay? When I talk about when we're really okay, when we really feel like the world's an okay place to be, what we have been able to do is integrate our attachment process, not only with our parents, but with nature, with animals, with the environment, with the world at large. And that then becomes our foundation. The reason I use integrate or the process of integrating is because attachment is a fluid process. Attachment is a verb. So If I want to be cleaner even about it, I would say that we don't really attach, we are attaching, and we're doing that all the time, 24/7 from the day that we're conceived until the day we die. So what
Yep.
I'm looking at is how do we integrate everything that is going on in our life into a place to where we have a foundation to stand on. The reason I don't use secure is one, it's a noun, it's not a verb. And two, I also do not use insecure. I use fragmented attachment. And if you could think about attachment as that process of like one of those big puzzles, those 1,000-piece puzzles that you do on your card table or dining room table or something. And as you're putting that together, like if there's a 1,000-piece puzzle, maybe you have 500 pieces in, you can sort of get the gist of the puzzle, but it's not fully integrated. It's not fully filled out. And so that's sort of how I think about the whole attachment process. So sort of set that there for a moment. When John Bowlby started talking about attachment, he did not use secure. He did not use anxious or avoidant. What he used was hyper anxious or energetic. So it was or active. So the hyperactive is what got later changed into anxious attachment. Hypoactive, what was later changed into avoidant. Those two mixed is then what got changed into disorganized. In my work, I've never seen anybody be in one of those. We slide all over the place. I've never seen someone that's purely avoidant or someone that's purely anxious or someone that's purely disorganized. What I've seen is that we're all of those, sometimes more we're one of them than the other, but we're sliding all over the place. So it's almost like if I go back to the paradigm of the puzzle, it's like sometimes we're down here in this corner trying to find a piece, and sometimes we're up here, and sometimes we're over here. Sometimes we have the border put together except over here. So this process is we're always being fluid. And sometimes we have more pieces put in there than other times. So what I want people to get in the work that I do is I want people to get, one, to not label themselves, because then that goes into all the protocol stuff. But two, every sort of building block of attachment comes from how we make contact. So I do talk about that we get anxious about making contact, or we will avoid contact, or we get disorganized inside when we want to make contact. So that breaks it down to people go, oh, well, I can work on, instead of labeling myself as anxious, what I can do is I can work on learning how to make contact in a better way. I can make contact, I can become less anxious, or I could even make contact while I'm anxious and see what happens. So that's why I use those terms, because they feel more real to me. And the other piece that happens is when we go into a new situation, if we're really integrated, we can handle that new situation. If we go into a new situation and we're not integrated, then we have more trouble handling that. So the work is a process of integrating. Again, it's fluid because that's what I've seen in our whole attachment process throughout our lives and how we do that. As far as working with somebody, the biggest piece I see in attachment work comes with the whole process of grieving the loss of the mother or father that we wish we would have had. In Jungian terms, we might call that the archetypal mother or father. So this is taking a little bit of a shift. When a child is born, a mother is born. When a child is born, a father is born. Like I think you said you have a little boy that's one-ish or something like that. Before that little guy was born, nor your wife were a mother or father. So you literally were born into fatherhood when he was born. Your wife was born into motherhood when he was born. The same. We all have an archetypal image of what a mother or father should be. And most of us as parents are not that, no matter how hard we try. And just a little bit that I know you from this time we were talking, my guess is you're a wonderful father. That'd be my guess, just from your energy. And probably one of the most truthful things that I could say is you're not perfect. The same way with me, I'm not perfect either. As a partner, as a therapist, you name it, I'm not perfect. So there's a split between who we are as humans and truly human beings and that archetypal mother or father. And that's what the wounding is, from my perspective. So the biggest piece in working with anybody, but particularly men, is that difference between who we really got and who we wanted. That's the wounding, as well as men who they really are versus their archetypal feeling of who they are as a father. So the vast majority of the work is twofold. One is allowing ourselves to grieve who we wanted so that we can fully accept who we got. It's not so different than somebody who's been in a relationship. That relationship ends and then they begin dating someone else 2 weeks later, and that rebound relationship doesn't work very well. And it doesn't work very well because they didn't grieve the loss of the relationship they just had. When they do get to grieve the loss of the relationship they just ended, then their next relationship will have a much better chance to thrive. But that's the same thing that we're working with, of grieving the loss of the parent that we wanted versus the one we got. One of the pieces, and this is just a little bit, and I don't want to disclose too much just because it's not ethical, of a man that I came in, and actually from Australia, who had gone through, his background was unbelievably and sort of fraught with abandonment over and over and over. So the first piece I work on is the process of helping somebody attach to something. In this case, it was one of my horses. And that's one of the biggest things that I do in working with people and horses. It's like, if we can begin to learn to attach to something or someone in a really integrated, healthy way, then that begins building that underlying foundation. And actually, this man, he was here for 3 days, and the transformation was amazing because he was able to be so in tune with one of my horses. And this particular horse, his name is Dylan. The horse's name is Dylan, not the man. Had never done this. And Dylan and I have been together 22 years. So I know this about Dylan. And it was like Dylan and this man began connecting in a way that I've never seen before. And Dylan actually laid down. He literally walked up next to this man and laid down like 2 feet, 3 feet from him, to the point, and the man actually squatted down and kneeled down, and they put their foreheads together. And it was, again, the way that I looked at that was that right brain to right brain connection, because horses live largely in their right brain, much more than in their left. And and that was the beginning of a foundation of being able to go, yes, I can do this. Yes, I know how to do this. Was everything totally put back together in 3 days? No. But was the foundation built where this particular man knew that he could do it, and then could take that into his relationship, take that into relationships with his kid? He had a child, and then into relationship with the rest of his family. What that did was it was like, oh, I can do this with a 1,000-pound horse. I can do this with you.
I mean, so much was coming up for me just then. I mean, it seems like horses are so disarmingly safe and yet so sensitive to pick up on the energy of other people, as you so acutely were kind enough to give me encouragement about what you were picking up in me. One of the things that did come up that I would like to talk about next time, if you're open to it, is, so my dad passed when I was 11. I found I was deeply craving older male presence in my life and mentors, and did thankfully find one when I was in college. But I think it's a real need. And I just want to say, to the extent that it's applicable, I appreciate you being that indirectly in this conversation to people we mentioned that you work with, like Connor and other of us young men, client of mine, actually, that we were talking about earlier, that you worked with at a retreat. For what it's worth, I definitely agree. The ideal goal is to have that established older men group, both for you all in your age group, but then also, to be in relationship with us younger guys. But I just want to thank you, because it's meant so much, even just you being you, sharing your experience as you are in the show has spoken much depth, to use your words earlier, beyond speech to a deeper language that I think is healing and necessary. So I just appreciate you doing that.
You bet. Yeah, and I'd love to be back on. If you want to schedule that, I'd be very open to that.
Good. Well, in the meantime, where can people find your work and get involved or even work with you if that's an opportunity?
Well, yeah, thank you for asking. Kimberly, my partner, and I are actually the only direct work I'm doing right now is we do couples intensives. So that's one piece. We're actually booked out for a few months. So if anyone is trying to get on, it's going to be a little bit. The other piece that we do is, and we may even expand this, it's called the Art of Instinct and Intuition for therapy, therapists and coaches. It's a 6-month program to help therapists go deeper and become less civilized in their therapeutic process. And I teach a number of other courses, like my model. We just finished a class on the Freeman Reich model, doing Wilhelm Reich's body structures in my model. Those are the kinds of things that we do. I also teach all the equine assisted work. So that's through the Gestalt Equine Institute of the Rockies. So probably the two best places would be the website for Gestalt Equine Institute of the Rockies, and the other is just my website, which is very difficult to remember. It's deweyfreeman.org. It's not very creative, but it gets people there. So those are the two biggest pieces. And I'm also, if there are smaller groups of men, and particularly men who are therapists and or coaches. Like a couple of weeks ago, there are 5 men who are all young therapists. They're actually in a very similar place as you, where they're either 2 months away from their license, or they've just gotten their license, or they came out and did a weekend. There were five men, and it was a combination of their personal work plus theoretical, like going deeper into becoming therapists. Those are the kinds of things I would love to do more of. One of my goals is I don't mean to sound morbid here, but I'm not going to live that much longer. I'm super healthy. I don't have any issues, but I'm 75. Will I be alive at 90? Maybe, maybe not. So one of my goals is to actually pass stuff on to people. Because if I can affect some young therapists or young coaches or young other people who are doing this work, I would love that.
Yeah. Well, duly noted, especially on my end twice. So I'll be reaching out for sure. Yeah, appreciate the work that you're doing. We'll make sure to put all that in the show notes. I will reach out to your team to schedule something for a round 2. And thank you again for your time.
You bet. Thank you very much.